Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Network of Networks. I'm your host, Allison Crawford. Interoperability is a key to improving supply chain performance. As disparate systems silo information into about specific processes, a holistic picture about corporate health and performance is lost. In this webinar, we're joined by Cindi Hain from Amelia and Rafal from Procter & Gamble, who attended the Shaman Circle on Amelia Island to discuss how line of business leaders can close the gap on inter-enterprise visibility by creating greater connectivity through business networks. Before I hand this over to Laura and the rest of the panel, there are a few things I want to cover with you. First, we're recording today's session and we'll post it to our on-demand webinar page. You can visit our website to listen to this or any of our other webinars. Additionally, we'll send out all the slides to all attendees within 24 hours of the conclusion of the webinar. We encourage you to share these slides with others in your organization, and if you have questions, please reach out to Laura or myself to set up a private discussion. We also want to hear your questions about our findings. Please post the Q&A or chat function to the lower left of your screen. We've left time at the end of the webinar to address all of your questions. Finally, we'll be live tweeting the webinar, so if you'd like to join in on the social media conversation, you can use the hashtag SCIWebinar and the @SCIInsights LLC Twitter handle during the event. With that, let me introduce your panel. First up is Cindi Hain, Vice President of Product Management at Amelia. Cindi is a 20-year global supply chain executive with a background in technology product management and implementation in the areas of global logistics, supply chain optimization, transportation management, and warehousing and distribution solution design. She has held leadership positions at the global logistics companies BAX Global, DB Schenker, and Americold, managing large-scale projects. At Amelia, she has participated in technology design, development, and implementations for global companies in the process industries. Cindi is responsible for Amelia's supply chain operating network for logistics, including solutions for transportation execution and visibility, freight cost management, time slot management, and terminal and warehouse visibility. Cindi holds a master-level degree in operations research and mathematics from Auburn University. She is a pragmatic marketing certified product manager and currently sits on the board of directors of the Technology Association of Georgia's Supply Chain and Logistics Society. We're also joined by Rafal, Global Process Leader, Demand and Business Planning, Global Operations Associate Director at Procter & Gamble. Rafal has offered 20 years of manufacturing and supply chain planning experience with Procter & Gamble. In manufacturing, Rafal managed baby care plant startup in Poland, FemCare operation and cost savings program. For over 15 years, he has worked on various assignments in initiative management, material supply management, supply network design, and category supply chaining planning in Central and Eastern Europe, Middle East and Africa, as well as in Western Europe. He has had an opportunity to work with diverse organizations across Poland and Germany, Switzerland, and recently North America, where Rafal owns global demand planning capability for P&G across the globe. Rafal holds an honors degree in fine mechanics from Warsaw's University of Technology. And finally, your host, Laura Cesari, founder of Supply Chain Insights. As an enterprise strategist, Laura focuses on the changing face of enterprise technologies. Her research is designed for the early adopter seeking first mover advantage, and she comes to us with over 40 years of diverse supply chain experience. So judging from all the conversations that we had in Florida last month at the Network of Networks conversation, Laura, I know there's a lot to talk about, so let's just get started. I'm going to hand this over to you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Allison. I'm excited about this topic. And one of the things that we will be doing is we will be archiving both the presentation and the audio so that people can share this with everyone in their organization. What we're trying to do is drive a movement for us to think about enterprise applications differently and to really think about outside-in processes and interoperability. So the Shaman Circle event this time was a little bit different in that we brought technologists together, people that are product managers, not salespeople, along with line of business leaders to ideate around a concept that we call the network of networks. And essentially, the network of networks would enable companies to have interoperability between networks. So many clients talk to me about the fact that They may have Elimica, they may have E2Open, they may have Exostar, they may have SupplyOn, they may have GT Nexus, but there is not a good way to have interoperability between the networks. And in addition, there is not a good way to have interoperability between enterprise apps, the applications that we use for the enterprise, to the networks. And questions were raised about what do these future architectures look like in the face of non-relational databases, open standards, open source code, and some of the new forms of analytics that are happening with prescriptive and cognitive analytics. So the group was a group of 30 people, 50% technologists, 50% line of business users, and we started the conversation with the line of business users talking about if they had a magic wand, what would this world look like? So I'm just going to pause here. Cindi and Rafal, why were you interested in coming to this event, and what was your perspective on this goal of the event? Cindi, why don't you go first?
Sure. Thank you, Laura, and thanks for having me today, and also really appreciate you and your colleagues for spearheading this important initiative. So I'm here representing the technology provider, business network provider side of the equation. And what's really clear to me as a product manager is that our industry is requiring that we do something different. And we would be remiss as a business network community if we didn't address this issue. So what I'm really interested in is making sure that I understand what's happening in the industry. I understand what my market is asking me to do, and that we, as a business network community, are ready to provide the solutions that are going to meet the market needs.
Was there anything that surprised you from the session, Cindi?
Well, there are two things that I heard from the shipper community that really struck a chord with me, and one of them was this idea that companies are now making decisions about technology based on the size of that technology provider's network. So kind of gone is the decision based on best breed, function, feature, fit, and this component of how big is your current network and what is that overlap between your network and my existing trading partner community. That overlap is a very important criteria. And I don't know that there's a level of frustration with the shipper community about that fact, right? Why is it so hard? It shouldn't be so difficult. And this, really imploring us to make this easier and to work together. And that's where I think this network of network initiative really has come about.
So onboarding. Rafal, let's let you talk a minute. Why were you interested in attending, and what was your biggest learning?
Well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to join the webinar here, and my passion for supply chain and the optimization in this area. We as a P&G, we obviously see a lot of opportunities end-to-end in the supply chain, and actually we see a very fragmented vendor landscape. And there are many companies that come to us and want to work with us. And then the question comes, how can we scale them up to the solution that will work across P&G and that will work across end-to-end supply chain? So one of my key interests was to really understand how could we better connect between the vendors and the call it companies like us, and then how can we create a certain standard and a certain benchmarking capability to drive the whole industry forward.
Were there any surprises for you, Rafal, in the session, or reflections?
Well, I think the whole event was absolutely incredible, and I personally learned a lot. I think one of the surprises was that the whole landscape is even more fragmented. More fragmented than I thought. And but at the same time, there is also hope. There is hope because the companies like in CPG and also on the technology vendors, they understand that there is a need to connect. So I think we all evolved, and now we really all want to do something in that area.
Yeah, I think that the fragmentation and the lack of a common language was really my takeaway. I think that there's a lot of confusion about applications. I think that vendor terminology makes the technology sound very similar when they're very different. And I think it was a good time for us to step back and think about what do different technologies really accomplish, but also to think about new technologies, whether it was non-relational databases or cognitive and prescriptive learning or streaming data architectures, and at what speed should data actually move, and what are the right architectures for that data to move. And it was very interesting for me to watch those discussions and for people to start to ask questions about, well, if we have streaming data architectures and we can have a redefinition of terms like ETA or expected on-time delivery, what does that mean for our networks? And I also really enjoyed the conversation on opening up APIs. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to ground the discussion in some research, and then I'm going to ask both Cindi and Rafal to talk about their magic wand. So in the session, we ask each of the business users to talk about if they had a magic wand, how would they want to solve this problem, and what would be their request for technology vendors and also other manufacturers or distributors or retailers in their value network to think about how we go about improving interoperability. As you'll see from the research that many companies are struggling with this term visibility, and there is no consistent definition of the term visibility. In fact, often I will have briefings with vendors and they'll talk about supply chain visibility, and I'll say, what do you mean by that? And they'll push back like, well, don't you know what that means? And the research that I've done, I find that there is many definitions of visibility as there are colors of paint in the paint store, right? They're just infinite. But what I want to go back and really think about is in our research, when we talk to supply chain leaders and we ask them to describe their supply chains, 1 in 3 say that there's room for improvement, and about the same say that it's working well. And many companies want a more global, aligned, and proactive supply chain. And when we look at the characteristics of companies that feel that their supply chain is working well versus the supply chains that feel that there's room for improvement, and the way to read this chart is that where you've got a red letter, you've got significance at a 90% confidence level. You can see that when companies have a higher level of supply chain visibility, a higher level of cross-functional alignment, which is not a trivial topic all in itself, and when you have a better understanding of the executive team and the ability to use data, that companies will have a higher probability of a supply chain that works well. Now, many times companies are working on functional objectives, and we find that interoperability may come out of the function. So, for example, transportation may be trying to automate their 3PLs and their different modes, or procurement may be trying to automate their suppliers, or manufacturing may be trying to automate their third-party contract manufacturers, or the folks that are sitting in the commercial teams may be trying to automate their network in the commercial arena for distributors and multi-tier demand. The focus of this particular workshop was to say, how can we have interoperability across selling or commercial distributor relationships, redefinition of demand so that we can have independent demand across the network? How can we have source, make, and deliver networks come together so that we can have interoperability between those processes, because we all know that when we're moving goods, we're also probably affecting procurement and manufacturing, and there is a need for us to deal with those cross-functional processes. Now, one of the major barriers we have is that many of our supply chains in the area of room for improvement are still very functional. And so getting a group together like this, one of my barriers was getting a leader from the manufacturing and retail organizations that could have a cross-functional discussion. And I think that's one of the barriers that we have as we talk about interoperability and we work with technology providers. And in the session, what we tried to do was strip away the salespeople from the technology side and the IT people from the business side so that we could have a business leader discussion talking directly to product management leaders on the technology side. And one of the issues is that we have an increase in outsourcing. If we look at outsourcing, we are very dependent on a network. However, the technologies are very centered on enterprise transactions, and most of the investment is currently focused on ERP and extensions of ERP, which is not sufficient. And there are many conflicting messages that are coming out of the ERP technology upgrades, like the recent announcement of SAP on S&C, or some of the discussions about what will SAP Ariba really end up being. And SAP Ariba is really designed for indirect materials, not for direct materials. And will that evolve? And what will that look like on HANA? There's a lot of lack of clarity there. But also, as we think about the world of analytics and we think about streaming data architectures and we think about prescriptive and cognitive analytics and what we could do in networks, it's really quite exciting. But right now, 30% of companies outsource half or more of manufacturing, and 55% outsource half or more of transportation. And the dilemma is that we have automated the enterprise, but not automated the network. And in fact, in the research that we've done over the last 2 years, the most effective thing that we do in the network is email and spreadsheets, which is just not adequate because we don't have bidirectional flows, we don't have a system of record, we don't have collaborative workflows, and there is insufficient movement there to really help. Now, in the business discussions that I have with the business leaders, there's a lot of confusion around, well, how do I connect and what does this mean? And most of our enterprise applications are one-to-one data models. So if we think about the traditional advanced planning space where we have a company who's trying to connect with a supplier, that is a one-to-one data model or a one-to-many data model, so that it would allow a Procter & Gamble to connect with a supplier, but that's also one-directional. It's not bidirectional. And so as we think about the evolution of the enterprise apps, the ERP space, which had the bolt-ons of the gateways like SAP, S&C, allowed us to send messages from ERP to suppliers, but they were one-directional, and they did not have a system of record or the ability to have collaborative workflow. Now, in the 1990s and 1980s, we developed EDI standards, which allows us to have documents, and that's another workhorse of the industry. But again, they're one-directional, and the document must be opened, and not all suppliers are able to be EDI compliant. As we look at business networks, we're moving to interoperability for a many-to-many data model and canonical infrastructure that allows a supplier to be able to translate by perhaps fax to EDI or RosettaNet or XML, however they want to communicate with the many trading partners on the other end. And 7% of flows today are going through supply chain operating networks, canonical infrastructures, people like GT Nexus, EDOpen, SupplyOn, GHX. And these many-to-many data models actually were from decades worth of work. If you remember back in 2001, 2003, we had about 450 network-based solutions. In that period of time, you know, we had a lot of crazy PR around the evolution of networks, and we had many that didn't make it. So there was Transora in consumer packaged goods. There was WWRE that changed names a lot. And at that point in time, I was with Gartner Group, and I covered about 450 of supply chain operating networks in that evolution. Today, there are about 12. And they're different variants, and it depends upon where you draw the line on the taxonomy, but they're about 12. And none of them provide interoperability between the networks. And the models are confused because of that. And also there's a question about what should the enterprise network look like for interoperability between these networks, and what should that look like, which brings up a discussion about, is it Hadoop, where we can use open source standards to be able to leave data at rest and move and index data? Is perhaps cognitive learning and rules-based ontology a way that we can really facilitate onboarding? So in the discussions, we started to challenge about our traditional thinking about data, about master data, about onboarding, and is there a way to do this easier? And one of the problems is if you look at visibility, and visibility, again, does not have a common definition, but there are many elements of visibility that we need to tackle simultaneously. One of the areas of visibility that we've done pretty well is manufacturing within a company. However, if we look at enterprise order management for customers, what's going across distributors, there's a very large gap. And if we look at first-tier material suppliers, there's a large gap. And we look at transportation logistics providers, there's a large gap, and also third-party manufacturing. These gaps are felt very strongly by manufacturers, and we also see that without a network that embraces the independent demand signal or what is happening in the channel, that our traditional applications like MRP and DRP cause the Bullwhip Effect, and that we're unable in the network to actually see independent demand or the takeaway in the channel. So what we wanted to do in the group was to really spark a new conversation around, you know, could we use new technologies, new concepts to be able to drive interoperability and to really rethink the problem. And one of the things that the group did was ideated around analytics. And most of the analytics that's being purchased today is descriptive analytics. And descriptive analytics allows us to see and visualize data, but not necessarily be predictive about how do we predict the future. And if you think about the last decade of supply chain applications, most of them were predictive. We used linear optimization, a lot of iLog embedded tools to be able to look at linear optimization and some variants of stochastic optimization or genetic algorithms, but most of these were very predictive in that we were predicting based upon known facts. Now, pattern recognition grew up in between predictive and prescriptive, and we started to see some multi-tier applications on pattern recognition to be able to look at things like demand sensing. Terra Technology and Tools Group were active in that area. And then as we move into prescriptive analytics, we're starting to see people in new best-of-breed providers coming into the market to help us with prescriptive analytics. And One of the best examples of prescriptive analytics we have on Google Maps, where perhaps we're driving down the road and there's a car crash or something happens and we get an alert. And the alert not only tells us that the crash has happened, but it tells us what should we do about it. And, these are the alternate routes to have take place. Now, we see in the evolution of prescriptive analytics, whether it's Watson or Transvoyant or Intera Solutions or RulesX, that we are starting to get prescriptive analytics into supply chain analytics, and then cognitive analytics, which basically is dealing with hypothesis engines and rules-based ontologies, allows us to rethink master data. So one of the things we wanted to do with the group was talk about, if we could have a magic wand and we could use structured and unstructured data. And so if you think about data, most of the data that we have is very structured data, and it's very low velocity data in our supply chain applications. If you would do a map of visibility and you would map data types on the x-axis and you would map data velocity on the y-axis, you would get a chart that looks something like this. And most of our enterprise investments have been very focused on the dark circle, things that fit in rows and columns. But as we think about unstructured data, things like maps, images, weather, GPS signals, or unstructured data, things like warranty data, quality data, logs on truckers, or high velocity data, which streaming data really requires different architectures than what we have today. RFID sensors is a type of streaming data. Telematics for ETA, and one of the things we talked about was the fact that the average industry had 5 telematics vendors, and what would those architectures look like? Or weather data can be streaming data. So one of the things that the group talked about was that data needed to really fly at the speed in which the processor required it, that not all data needs to fly first class, and that many times people will say they want to have real-time visibility, but in principle, real-time really needs to be right time, and that we need to think about architectures that are streaming architectures, cloud-based architectures, and data lake architectures that allow us to use data at the right time and data in the right form. So through the session, we started with what are the principles in which we could come together and we could start to build the network of networks. And one of the things that stuck out for me is this concept of time. Not all data needs to fly first class was one of the things that was said in the group, which I thought was brilliant. While people talk about real-time data, we need to have the right architectures and understand what that means for the right time. The other thing was, we have black boxes today that, are optimization, which is closed, but we're building glass boxes here. And glass boxes allow us to see the interrelationship of data in new ways. And so as we think about rules-based ontologies and the interrelationship of data, we have the visibility of the math for the super user. And one of the things that was really interesting to me is that, a traditional view of visibility is that I have a control room and I have people in a control room. The people that are really driving against a higher level standard of the use of technology see that the applications will learn and the applications will sense, and the glass boxes will allow us to learn and to tune, and that we will have transparency of the analytics. And then, one of the issues that we talked about was that many times people put in analytics projects as a technology project versus looking at testing and tuning and learning and evolving the analytics over time. And so as we think about the network of networks, we have to have cross-functional teams that are analytics capable, that can be able to work on the tuning and to be able to have these conversations with technology providers. And then the whole discussion around digitizing relationships. We aren't very good to have either our customers or our suppliers to be able to digitize, and then we need to map policies and flows more readily. And everybody needs to focus on what they're good at and not confuse the buyer. You know, many of the technology providers use the same language, and the buyers are very confused. And so we had an interesting discussion about, well, let's talk about what people are good at and how could people bring what they're good at so that we could have some open APIs and interoperability and focus on outside-in processes. And when we do that, one of the things we'd like to do is externalize data so that as companies join the networks, they can allow their data to be aggregated and used in things like prescriptive analytics or flows across networks for insights. And it requires taking responsibility for the network. About 32% of companies today design their enterprise. But if we're going to take responsibility for the network, we've got to design the network. So open standards, publish and subscribe keys, interesting topic, and then build bidirectional flows within our enterprise system of record. So these were some of the principles at the end of the day we had on the whiteboard. Now the next session we're going to come back and we're going to focus on case studies, whether it's on interoperability across source, make, and deliver, or interoperability between networks, or evolution of streaming data architectures, or evolution of new forms of analytics. What we're going to do as a group is, over time, meeting twice a year, is we're going to start to test the concepts of analytics and networks. So Rafal and Cindi, if you had a magic wand for the audience, what would you like them to be thinking about right now, and what would you like them to do? Rafal, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Laura. And the content is rich and the opportunity is huge. So when you asked that question, my immediate reaction was that, well, I would very likely need more than one magic wand. Let me just focus on a couple of things. I see that the complexity, challenges, and opportunities are huge, and despite all the work in the industry, they simply continue to be there. The progress in the technology, both in terms of speed and lower cost, right now allows several companies to invest in supply chain capabilities. Obviously, Procter & Gamble is one of the big players in this area. In terms of opportunities, coming to the magic wand, I see a couple of them. To start with, I believe all CPG companies like P&G face very similar challenges across supply chain. We all want to improve service, reduce inventories, and drive down the cost. Technology providers' landscape remains very fragmented and non-standard, so there is a lot going on. The powerhouses like SAP remain strong, but the leading-edge innovation comes from the smaller, more agile companies focusing on more specialized solutions. It creates several challenges for global CPG players as we are looking for scale and global presence to support our operations across the globe. We need time and resources to understand the landscape, identify most promising solutions, and then scale up. Clearly, while benefits are there, the risk profile from business continuity standpoint increases as our overall work process and systems get more complex. We continue to search for the right balance in this area, and obviously, it would be more effective to work with less vendors who could cover more ground. In addition, and I think here this is really the key, I think the supply chain data becomes more and more a commodity, and that data should be shared more openly. Ideally, we should have common data sharing and ability to pass material ETAs, inventory, ASN, point of sale, and other. At the moment, the situation is that each one requires some unique setup and integration. I believe that this is an industry-wide effort loss at the moment. And this is also exactly where network of networks can help, and the whole thing is linked to the second opportunity that I see. Leading the global capability of demand planning for P&G, I receive a lot of invitations from several vendors to look at the various solutions they offer with very similar selling line. We have developed an incredible system that will solve your problems. So let's talk so we can understand your exact issues. Then we would tailor our solutions to your needs, pilot, and then finally roll out. While this approach seems reasonable, it is in fact not very helpful, especially considering the fragmentation of the solutions. Few examples that I have in mind: we have several platforms for point of sale and several standards for demand sensing. We have several platforms for transportation management and actually multiple standards by mode of transportation. We have several platforms for supplier to manufacturer connectivity. And actually, we have no platform that truly looks at the supply chain end to end. Now, if I would think about my magic wand, I would really love to see vendors coming together as a network to us with more complete end-to-end solutions offering work process and system package versus just individual system elements. I think partially it will anyway happen via vendor market consolidation, but it will take time. Network would be a quick win in this area. Certainly, big CPG companies face expectations to drive certain industry standards across supply chain and contribute to the industry. I think that such an expectation is very fair, but becomes more and more difficult to meet. The progress in the IT industry is massive, and the creativity is huge, so we can simply hardly stay up to speed with everything that is going on. We need to join forces, and that is for sure.
Thank you, Rafal. Cindi, how about your perspective? What's your magic wand as you sit there as a technologist? What did you learn, and what's your magic wand?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, coming from the technology provider side, how can I give Rafal what he's asking for, right? If I had my magic wand and it could create this network of networks, it would really have three characteristics that I want to point out. And the first one is it would be agnostic. So not just standards agnostic, but also protocol agnostic and data source agnostic. So, just a little bit of background, the company Amelia that I work for, we started in the chemical industry in the early 2000s as an EDI hub for the chemical industry. And as such, we adopted the standard messaging standards of the day, which was the ChemXML standard. And what we've discovered over the years that we've been supporting that industry is that there's so much variability within any particular company, much less across their trading partners, that standards just are difficult to maintain and they just don't work. So, at this point in time in our network, we are transacting the highest percentage of document type that we have in our network is an IDOC. So clearly we've got to be able to support and be agnostic to any particular standards and support that variability that we're seeing in our customers' community. So certainly my network of networks, magic wand solution would be agnostic with regard to standards. But it would also be agnostic with regard to data sources. And I think this goes, Laura, back to what you were talking about earlier with the volume, the velocity, and the variability that we have in the data. So it's not enough for my network to be able to support traditional integration methods. It's not enough for it to only support publish and subscribe. It's not enough for it to only support social listening. It's got to be able to take all sorts of data and communication, however we can get that data and pull that into a single network. So really this idea of our partner community being able to come as you are, so that we can really increase the amount of relationships that you can digitize, and basically have this agnostic network. So that's the first characteristic of my network of networks. The second one is a word we've used quite a bit in this discussion, and that's interoperable, right? So and just pause just for a bit to think about how difficult that is, based on the variability I was referring to earlier. But truly interoperable connections mean that anytime I've got a trading partner trading on my network, as soon as I connect them, they're available for everyone else on that network. And so, what that challenge is to me, this is the key to how do we make it stop being so hard, and this is the key to generating that network effect. So if I can deliver true interoperability and still be able to accommodate the unique business processes that I'm dealing with within my customers' businesses, then that's truly going to provide that network effect. So that second characteristic of interoperability is crucial in my network of networks. And then thirdly, I think it's important for us to all remember that these ecosystems are made up of people who are collaborating to manage global businesses and to try to fix problems. And the extent to which we can manage our ecosystem with that understanding and make collaboration easy and fun for all the participants, then that's the extent that we can drive high levels of adoption and again, truly realize that network effect. So those would be the characteristics of my magic wand network of networks, Laura.
Okay, all right. Now, one of the things that we're going to be doing in our next meeting is we're going to be actually going through case studies. So I'm looking forward to, I've got one case study where we've got cognitive learning on top of non-relational database. Could we have cognitive learning actually help us with those different data types and protocols? And could cognitive learning on top of non-relational allow us to leave data at rest and index data, much like the e-commerce vendors do? And one of the other case studies I think is very interesting is real-time data streaming across either Alemico or GT Nexus and bringing the telematics vendors together. So we're going to be featuring in our next session case studies, and it'll be in Dallas, and it will be invitation only with a small group. Again, no salespeople, only focused business leaders talking to technologists. So let's take some questions from the audience. One of the questions that we've been asked is, does supply chain have a common definition? And I find that everyone defines supply chain very differently, and the SCORE model was an attempt to define supply chain, but the SCORE model was an enterprise-based model, and the definition of value networks and the ability to have outside-in processes are something that I think we're starting to see, a real push in the definition of supply chain. What do you think there, Rafal?
Well, I think if you ask for the supply chain definition, there are as many as the companies, or maybe even more. We are struggling to really clearly define what is supply chain for ourselves. And the more we talk end-to-end, and the more we learn, and the more people we involve in our conversations, that the definition gets bigger and bigger. And from the supply network operations, let's say, we are part of the product supply organization together with manufacturing and purchasing. So we obviously want to involve those guys as well, and I think it is actually more important to me what the opportunities are, how can we solve the issues that we see, and what is the ultimate vision that we want to drive, than the very specific definition of what is the part of supply chain or supply network and what is not. We look at it in a very, very broad way.
Yep. And one of the other questions is, are we talking about open source standards and R? And the open source standards that we are talking about are Apache Spark and the elements of Hadoop, and we're also looking at R as an embedded form of predictive and prescriptive analytics. And, could we have open standards that could enable interoperability is one of the things that we're asking. Now, there is a discussion about, is there a huge gap between sexy and getting just the basics done? And I think that, all companies struggle with the basics. But, if I look at the fact that 9 out of 10 companies are stuck on their ability to drive inventory turns and costs, that the opportunity for us is in the gap between the functions and the gap between companies. And I think that for us to move forward, we've got to change the conversation. And I think that we can rethink kind of the age-old problems of master data or integration through new forms of technology. Cindi, any comments on that question?
Yeah, it takes me back to in our discussion, we had some very interesting thoughts around, part of the reason that B2B integration can be difficult is because of the variability from one transaction even to the next of the same type flowing through. So how can we use cognitive reasoning capabilities to detect when there's an issue and learn over time and fix the data and clean the data so that it really starts to change your definition of master data and master data maintenance if in your B2B integration layer you've got the tools, cognitive learning and artificial intelligence types of tools to continuously clean and scrub that. So that's one of the areas that to me sounds the most exciting and interesting for us to look at.
Yeah, I think that is an exciting area, that and the streaming data. And I look forward to seeing those case studies. We've got a couple of great case studies that are being cooked up, and this next session will really be on case studies. So, Rafal, any closing words for us?
Well, I think the whole concept of networks is phenomenal. It's phenomenal because it would really take us a lot of time, energy, and resources that I'm not sure we have to tackle the problem company by company and technology provider by technology provider. I think what I see with the progress of the technology, there is more data available, but what we do with this data, we bring better visibility to the planners across supply chain, but we are not necessarily helping them with the right analytics, with the right connections, with the right end-to-end solutions, so they could do their work in a more effective way. They definitely have more data, no doubt about it. But whether we make their work easier with more data, that is where I'm not sure. We definitely strive, and I think the time will show. And I truly believe that the initiative of Network of Networks will really help us to accelerate that journey.
Yeah, I agree. Cindi, any last words?
Well, I think one of the things I heard definitely from the shipper community is this idea that don't mind if you brand the data, just make sure you share the data. So passing data around is not necessarily where the value is, it's what you do with it once you have it. And so to me, I've heard the call from the community to say, you got to make this simpler and let's figure out how to do this open sharing of data and how to commoditize supply chain transactions, because we all recognize that what real value is going to be achieved is by what we do with it.
Great.
Right.
Well, here are some of the ways that you can follow the work. We will be writing about the work on the Supply Chain Shaman. We'll also be posting actively to our online community on Beat Fusion. And this webinar will be posted on SlideShare along with the slides so that you can use it. We believe in open content and openly sharing. You can follow us on Twitter and get our insights. And we are counting down for our Supply Chain Summit in Scottsdale, Arizona on September 7th or 6th through the 9th. And 5 themes. We'll be announcing the supply chains to admire, the companies that have basically improved performance and driven improvement for the period of 2006 to 2015. We'll have a worldwide economist who will be talking about 2030 and what that looks like and changing trade lanes. We'll be featuring case studies on making the digital pivot and what that looks like and how to drive digital transformation. So we're hoping to see people at the summit, and we look forward to seeing you there. The other thing I want to just briefly let people know is, by popular request, we have partnered with CorpU to bring our content onto an e-learning platform in 7 modules that we will be rolling out over the summer and showcasing at the Global Summit. And these modules allow online benchmarking and also allow you to look at cohorts around the world to basically take the research and to be able to spark a different conversation. And if you're interested in these, we actually have ambassador programs that are starting up that allow people to take the courses and to basically, with no money exchange, test the courses and give us insight into the effectiveness or how to make them better. All right, thanks very much for joining us. Our next webinar is on big data analytics, and we, again, will have a panel to talk about that. It is our goal to spark new conversations for supply chain leaders. Allison?
Great. Thanks, Laura, and thank you, Cindi and Rafal, for joining us today, and thanks all of you who were able to attend. As Laura mentioned, we have many ways for you to engage with us, so we do encourage you to do that so you can know about our webinars, our research, and other upcoming events. As I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, we will be sending out the slides and recording link to everyone today, so stay tuned for that. Do check your spam folder if you haven't gotten it by 5 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. Please do reach out to me and I'll make sure that you get a copy of that. And as Laura mentioned, we'll be doing another webinar in about a month, so you can go to our webpage and see the upcoming webinars and register for those upcoming webinars as we roll them out. So thanks, everyone, for joining us today, and we look forward to helping you with your supply chain pursuit of excellence as we go forward. Thanks, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.